and welcome to another episode of Is It Just Me? With myself, Jess, and my co-host, Luke. Thanks for coming back again, Luke. How you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you, Jess. Doing good. Sunny day in London here today, thankfully, which is quite nice. So managed to get out for my one government permitted daily outing, which has been good to soak up some of the sun. And we're still without racing, but that doesn't mean there hasn't been any shortage of controversy in the motorsport world over the last week or so.
True, and we actually weren't going to be talking about this subject this week. We were going to pick something else, but in light of everything that kicked off at the weekend, it was just a subject that we really couldn't ignore, could we? It had divided people pretty severely. You're either in the absolutely this is ridiculous, or leave it alone and just let it be. And of course, what we're talking about is those, should I say, IndyCar Esports incidents, we're calling them. So the topic of today's podcast is it just me? Or should incidents in virtual racing not be taken as seriously as real racing? So obviously, if you are nowhere on Twitter or you've been under a rock, then you have probably not heard about what we're talking about. So to give you guys context, obviously, there was the Indy 175 event happening. It was the very last IndyCar Esports round they were holding, because they are one of the American series that think they're going to get racing in a few weeks, which seems like pretty unbelievable, but there we go, right? That's a subject for a whole other podcast, but let's stick with the esports. So Luke, do you want to tell us a little bit about what happened during that Indy 175 event?
Sure. So as you rightly say, it was the last round of the 6-race series that IndyCar were doing. IndyCar, they have their month of May. It's obviously so important to them with the Indy 500 at the very end of it. Couldn't do any of that. So instead they had a shortened race at the virtual Indianapolis Motor Speedway as the sort of crown jewel, the end of their big esports event. Lando Norris had come across from Formula One to race in it. Had the Supercars champion Scott McLaughlin, and a really big grid, very, very seriously event. Taken very seriously, should I say. And it's been a real success until the closing stages of this race. There are a few incidents that happened with about 9 laps to go. We had Norris with former champion and Indy 500 winner Simon Pagenaud, both running near the front of the field. They both got involved in an accident between that also had Graham Rahal involved as well. And that left Pagenaud towards the back out of the race, pretty angry. And then Pagenaud was later heard on Twitch saying, we need to take Lando out. And then a few laps later, Pagenaud slowed completely. Norris came around to complete another lap and came across this slow-going Penske, and they crashed, and that was the end of Norris's race with 2 laps to go, taking away his chance of winning it. So that was already one incident that was pretty bad. And then we had, on the very, very last lap of the race, I think we had about 6 cars fighting for the lead. You had Marcus Ericsson, Oliver Askew, Pato O'Ward, all of them involved. There was a clash between O'Ward and Ericsson going into the penultimate corner that Ericsson was left furious about, that he'd been tapped out of the race. O'Ward was very apologetic and said that he went for a move and it just didn't work. These things do happen. That paved the way then for Oliver Askew, Lando Norris's McLaren SP teammate, and Santino Ferrucci. They were in a drag race going to the line. Askew was a nose ahead and he looked like he was going to win it. And in the very last second, Ferrucci sideswipes him across, sent both cars flying into the air, out of the race, and out of nowhere, Scott McLaughlin, who was 6th going into the final corner, ended up winning the race. It was incredible. But it has left so many people angry across social media. The drivers getting really passionate about it as well, as to just where do you draw the line about these incidents, even in the virtual world, and did it go too far in that Indy 175 event?
Yeah, there has been quite the outpouring of tweets and comments, and it obviously has led us now to maybe delve into whether this is right or wrong. Does Pagenaud... we've heard that Pagenaud's been getting death threats and the like on Twitter, which, I don't think there's ever really a time to be sending anybody death threats. But again, that's probably a slightly different subject for us to tackle in terms of social media's role in all of this. But let's take a look at some of the immediate reactions after that. So, Norris has come out saying that Pagenaud gets a bit salty that a non-IndyCar driver is going to win an IndyCar race and it just ruins it. So he's essentially, Lando obviously is a very well-known face right now because of the amount of streaming he's doing, the amount of online racing he's doing, and he has a big following. And who's this kid, thinks he can like walk into our IndyCar race and win it. We're not going to have that because we're IndyCar drivers, and who's this kid think he is? That seems to be the vibe that people think that Pagenaud had. I mean, whether or not we can define that, he's not come out saying that. But it's that case of, was it done in spite? And therefore, if it was done in spite, should it be punished? Because at the end of the day, you've just ruined an entire race effectively because you're a bit upset that you got taken out. What are your thoughts, Luke?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is the big issue, I think, particularly with Pagenaud's move. It's the intention behind it, and it is the fact that it was going to be an F1 guy coming across doing something very, very different. And Norris had already won his very, very first virtual IndyCar event from pole position. And again, but that is because Lando is so dedicated to iRacing, the platform they're racing on. He puts in hours and hours and hours. He said before that he feels a bit embarrassed even about his playtime on there, just because it's so huge. But that's why he's so good. And even if he is an F1 driver coming into IndyCar, he knows that game inside out. He knows how it works. So I think it shouldn't have been a surprise that he was doing that well. The big contention and the big issue I think I have with Pagenaud's move in particular is that there's been no comment since. He said nothing. He's not been apologetic. He's not said, look, sorry, Lando, but look, hands up. I didn't want you to win. I wanted an IndyCar to win, an IndyCar driver to win the IndyCar event. But there's been nothing, absolutely nothing. And when the footage of his Twitch stream came out where he was saying to his virtual spotter in that race, I'll go and take Lando out, it's pretty damning. And it just is. I think I put a tweet up saying these are grown ass men, like they're men in their 20s and their 30s in Pagenaud's case, and it's a bit like, really, I just don't see why you would get that angry about someone else winning on a video game. And then obviously that then leads into the debate of, well, is it a game or what is it and where does it really rank? But the one big thing is obviously that you would never ever see Simon Pagenaud doing anything like that on a real live race circuit.
Yeah, but I think it has been this entire scenario we find ourselves in, and actually for a lot of the reasons why certain other drivers have maybe got in trouble over certain things they've done on esports platforms is because we are getting this look into them in situ, right? In the middle of a race, no helmet, they're streaming, they're bantering with their virtual spotters or whomever. And whilst I think that's brilliant because you are getting to see driver personality during a race, which is something that we would never get to see normally, we only get to see them before they get in the car and straight after they jump out of the car, which if they've had an accident, they're usually still very hot-headed. But I think that's where a lot of people have the problem, is that you saw him intentionally say, let's go get Lando, intentionally slow, take him out, and then after it was like, oh, I totally didn't mean to do that, like, oh, look what happened, as if he thought that everybody would have missed the point where he specifically said that's what his intentions were. So I think there's I mean, I'm sure we're going to go into it in a little bit more detail later on in this show, but there's that whole element of, is it sportsmanlike? As sports people, was that sportsmanlike? And is it that what we're looking at in terms of punishing, rather than, the fact that he essentially created a racing incident, So why don't we take a listen to what a few of the fans sent in, and we'll start off with Herman. What does Herman think about all this?
I don't think that racing incidents in esports should be punished as severely as they are in real life racing, because there are no people at risk, there are no investments like cars or track facilities at risk, and in the end it's just computer gaming. I mean, I'm a very basic sim racer myself, and I get really frustrated when people are like racing unfair, punting you off the track and stuff. And still there are sponsors involved and everything, but it's still just computer gaming. And in the end, people should just be glad that they can race online when there's no real life racing going on, obviously. And people should just be glad that they're alive, that they're healthy, and should just enjoy the game, in my opinion.
So Herman there is basically just saying, like, you should just be happy you're alive, guys. Like, chill out. Which I think a lot of people on Twitter could probably use a bit of a dose of in terms of perspective. But so he's saying, end of the day, it's just a game. Why are we so bothered about it?
Yeah, and that certainly has a lot of merit to it. And I think one of my habits I picked up during lockdown is Gran Turismo. I've been playing that game for a lot of hours. And yeah, you have races where sometimes you get taken out and it's annoying, but you just kind of go, well, okay, well, it doesn't matter because I'm not hurt or I've not lost anything apart from maybe like 20 minutes of my time where I was going to win that race, but I can't do that anymore. And so that I agree with. But what I would counter to Herman's point is that the way that the IndyCar series in particular set up this championship, it went way beyond it being just a video game and just a bit of fun. Like, they tried to make this as serious as possible. They struck broadcasting agreements with all of the big like TV broadcasters who would normally show those IndyCar races. And I think that up until this final race, IndyCar won a lot of praise from the whole motorsport community for how professionally they were running that series and for how well they had that full polished product with TV graphics, with the commentators, with everything. And that, I think, really showed like how like professional and official they were trying to make it. So I think, yeah, okay, yes, it is only a game. That's a debate we'll get into later in this show. But I think it really did undo all of the work that IndyCar in particular was doing to make it so official and as close to the real thing as we can get right now.
I think that hits the nail on the head, really. If I want to talk about how I actually feel about it, I think, these events are essentially replacing the racing that we're missing. And I don't mean replacing the racing in terms of like maybe even on enjoyment factors, right? But it's IndyCar is a business and it has to continue to operate as such. And so their replacement for that now is to have run these events. And as you said, they've struck up broadcast rights. They have, the sponsors are paying real world money to be shown in these events so that they're at least getting some awareness still raised about them. And obviously, when we cut down to the brass tacks of it, sponsorship is a massive part of motorsport, and it's what keeps the sport going. So if you then jeopardize that or put that into disrepute, then you are going to get punished because it's serious, right? It's the matter of business. And I'm sure everyone's like, well, that's the problem with motorsport anyway. It's all about business and not about like the passion and the driving and all of that stuff. But I mean, if we're all going to get bleary-eyed about it, then the motorsports that you know and love won't exist. So, as much as that might be a hard truth for people to swallow, it's kind of the hard and fast of it, not to use a fast pun in a motorsport debate. But so I think that's where this incident and maybe a few of the other incidents where we've had actual real world implications, where drivers have been reprimanded. In the case of Kyle Larson, he's been completely and utterly dropped by NASCAR. Obviously, I guess we could argue that incident in particular was slightly separate from it just being esports. That was just a conduct reprimand. So, but again, I would say that it was the nature of esports, the nature of again, I'm not defending. I want to make it very clear, I'm not defending the word he used or his actions, but it is that sense of esports is very relaxed, or at least the esports that maybe these professional drivers have been working on is what they do in their fun, right? It's what they do for fun. It's what they do to, keep themselves entertained and sharp in between races. And they are very used to being in this relaxed environment. All of a sudden now, they've got to have their PR face on and their sponsor face on. And whilst I think there's a brilliant quote, and I forget who said it, and I think it was in relation to Kimi Räikkönen, but it's the fact that drivers aren't paid the big bucks to race cars because they do that for free. They're paid the big bucks to represent the sponsors and to do the PR stuff that they really don't want to do. And that is the job of a driver, right? So
exactly.
if you then don't do your job and you actually put the business at risk by sponsors going, well, I don't want to be associated with that, then you therefore, you should be reprimanded, right? What do you think? Because I've been talking for about 10 minutes. I feel like on a right rant there.
No, but it's all good stuff. It's all very, very true. And I mean, in the case of Ferrucci, for example, he had his stream set up, and behind him he had a sponsor board, like showing all of the sponsors for that car. And I think particularly in IndyCar, probably more so than Formula One, it's very explicit as to who the sponsor is for that particular car. It'll always be Dalecoin Racing with XYZ, and that is whoever is sponsoring that car for that race or for that weekend. They have one-off liveries for individual races and things like that. And that was even true for this whole IndyCar series they've been doing. Like, the sponsors were really getting involved, and it was, again, they were trying to make it as legit and as serious as possible. And you're absolutely correct that these sponsors, ultimately, they are the people who fund us to go motor racing, who get these drivers the opportunities to do what they do. And okay, the virtual world, it's not as reliant on that, because once you've got your sim and your steering wheel and your iRacing subscription or whatever, you're away. Like that is all of the costs that you will incur. But they are ultimately still under contract with these teams and still under contract with these sponsors, and therefore they've still got to behave, I think, as they would in the real world, real life racing situations. And yeah, you're absolutely right that we do see them in a far more relaxed sort of atmosphere. They're just at home, they're chilling out, and yeah, in a lot of cases, they're whatever they're saying, everything they say is being picked up on Twitch, and everyone can see exactly what they're doing and thinking behind the wheel. And I think the other thing that comes into it is just how seriously some of these drivers have taken it. I mean, in the case of Lando Norris, he's got lots of his McLaren engineers actually involved, like working on analysing data, on going through his telemetry and everything with his car, even on iRacing, because that's how seriously he wants to take it. Same for Marcus Ericsson. He said he took it very, very seriously as well, to that kind of level. Scott Dixon, I mean, he's got a young family, a young baby boy as well, but he's taking time away from his family to go and focus on these virtual IndyCar events. So that is when the debate about, oh, it's just a game, that is kind of the flip side of it, because some of them aren't treating it like a game. They are treating it just as they would in the real world. So I think it's difficult for those guys in particular, I think, to swallow, because they've put a lot of time and effort into it, and for it to all be undone like this, I think it's a real shame.
Are they taking it too seriously?
No, I don't think so. Like, ultimately, if you want to win and you want to be the best, as in real world racing, then yeah, you will absolutely put in the hours, and you will rise to the top. And that is why Lando was able to go straight into IndyCar, straight into a new car, and up against all these super experienced drivers, and win straight away, because he's just so good at that game, and because he puts in the hard graft. Some of them who probably took it a little less seriously, they would have fallen towards the back, fine. And ultimately, it's all about, I think, what they want to get out of it. And for some of them, if it was just a jolly and a bit of a laugh, fine. But that shouldn't take it away from the guys who do want to take it seriously, I think. So, I don't know.
It'd be good to hear from, and maybe we can talk to somebody from one of the teams at some point. But, I would love to know, how are these drivers briefed for these events? What is being said to them? Is the importance of it being drilled into them, or are they just being like, oh, there's a race, you got to do it because you got to represent the team, you've got a sim, we've sent you a sim, set up, off you go, run? Are they getting because obviously when they're racing, the PR and the press and the communications officers are on it. They're next to them, they're glued to them, they are feeding them, don't say this, do say this, and in the case of F1, everything's being recorded, there's constant monitoring. And I think for some people, they say that's to our detriment, because we don't get to see the real them all the time. Some drivers are good at managing it, others aren't so much. They become a bit of PR robots, but it's drilled into them. They know how important that is. They know a single slip up could cost them their jobs. So I would love to know, like, how seriously are these guys being briefed, or are they just kind of being left to their own devices, and therefore is it actually their fault that they're then kind of slipping into these bad habits or more casual habits and getting into trouble?
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to know how that varies sort of across the board. It's been quite interesting from a sort of journalist perspective, how many press releases I'm still getting about how engine manufacturers or drivers or teams are performing. And it is reading and it is like formatted and laid out exactly as though it were a real world race. So that kind of suggests that, okay, they are taking it very, very seriously. But then if other sides are letting it down, then it kind of, I guess, creates this sort of imbalance where you do have, the likes of Lando, the likes of Marcus Ericsson putting in the hard graft and the hours because they want to win and they want to be the best. And if others are like just being told, let's just turn up, have a go, see how you do, then that's not going to quite work. So yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there does need to sort of be that even keel across the field, definitely.
Let's have a listen to what Nicholas has to say, because Nicholas thinks he's come up with a solution as to how we could maybe police these events better.
I think race stewards should be present at official esports events and championships. There is a lot of resources put towards hosting these events, and there is a lot on the line in terms of prize money. Having stewards present will also validate and solidify the events and perhaps lift the reputation of esports. Esports will be taken more seriously if stewards are involved. Exhibition events shouldn't have stewards present, as there is less to lose for the participants. In terms of exhibition events, having stewards present will make the event more serious than it is meant to be and will perhaps take the fun out of it. What Pagenaud did was stupid and his actions are perhaps not justifiable. The uproar and backlash, especially on Twitter, will do more damage to him than him getting a penalty in an esports race. His reputation as a driver is called into question, and that could affect him in the long term as well.
See, I think Nicholas raises some great points there. Because arguably by Pagenaud not being reprimanded there and then during that race has then led to this outcry and this uproar that, as Nicholas said, is actually going to be very damaging for Pagenaud's reputation when he goes back to IndyCar, arguably. I mean, it's going to be something that probably, and people might say unjustifiably so, but it might be something that comes with him, and it's what the fans are going to remember, because that clip of him on Twitch saying, I'm going for Lando, and then trying to lie, people have seen that now. And I think, what do you think about, do you think if he'd have got a penalty, I mean, how can you really, it was the last event, what penalty could we have given him? That would have kind of justified the crime. But do you think if he had got a penalty there and then that there would be less outcry?
I think at least some communication between some kind of virtual stewards or whatever you want to call them, get people involved to rule on these matters. I think that would have at least deterred him from doing anything like that. Because I think if something had been said there and then, like, okay, you're a lap down or whatever, then that may have sort of, I don't know. It's so tricky though, isn't it? Because again, like, how would you stop him from doing that otherwise? Like, he's at the back of the field, and would you have someone watching all of their Twitch channels and listening to what they're saying and looking out for it? I don't know. So it is so hard to police. It is. And as you rightly say, like, what penalty can you give? Oh, you're going to get a 5-place grid penalty for the next race or something like that. I don't know. But like, it is a really, really tough one. I think some kind of proper message though and proper ruling, I think that would have been good. We saw the head of iRacing's vice president, let me find the message from Steve Myers. He said, this was an IndyCar private series with our participants exclusively chosen by them. We are not in the business of policing anyone's private leagues for racing issues. Does it suck that he made a mockery of a great opportunity for the series and iRacing? Absolutely. And I think that raises some good points, that ultimately, it was not down to iRacing, it was down to IndyCar to police it and to look after it properly, because it was their sanctioned event. But again, how would they do that? It's a really, really tricky one. But I think some kind of sort of message, and again, just communication with those drivers saying, look, please be fair, don't act as you would in a normal race, like do exactly the same things you would on track. Don't treat it any differently, even though you don't have that same risk factor involved.
Yeah, no, I think I agree there, for sure. So, I mean, because from what I can understand, right, there are the automatic stewards. I mean, in iRacing, actually, it's very sensitive, right? The game. Sorry, I'm going to get killed for calling iRacing a game. The simulation.
Jess.
Sorry, iRacing fans. The simulation is very sensitive to any form of contact, out of bounds, hitting the walls, whatever like that. It will automatically generate penalties or mainly time penalties, right? So that I think is probably set up, and I mean, I don't know, I can't recall what exactly happened or whether there were any penalties applied during any of those incidents. Do you remember if there were any applied actually during the race?
I can't say for sure, but I do know that, I mean, I was watching one of Lando's streams yesterday, and they always say, oh, can you clear the black flag for me? So yeah. I think, as you rightly say, like, it's very, very sensitive. But then, obviously, if they're just mucking about, having an online race, crashing into each other, then they'll say, oh, can you clear the black flag for me? So they stay in the race, and that's fine. So I don't know how that will work on the IndyCar side of it. But if it is that sensitive, obviously, they wouldn't want any of their drivers really to be black flagged. They'll keep them in the race for as long as they can. So yeah, again, it's difficult. Like, how do you properly police that? How do you deal with the parameters of a simulation that is set up to try and like keep people racing and everything? But if it goes too far sometimes, and there's no sort of human sort of subjectivity, I don't know. It's so tricky, so tricky to police.
True. And especially because if we take a look back to the kind of the root of the incident, which was that three-way battle that ended up with Pagenaud getting into a bit of a spin, was actually a glitch, right? So it kind of glitched out, and cars collided when they probably shouldn't have, because of the physics of the game. Kind of just went and sent Pagenaud into the wall, basically. So, you know, again, like, I think that's another problem that people have, and saying like, well, how can we possibly take this seriously? Because Pagenaud was then in an incident that shouldn't have ever happened. It was a computer glitch. So, you know, what's the point? Can we take this seriously if the actual racing is not going to simulate real racing in any case anyway? Yeah,
that is the challenge. But then you counter that by saying, well, we're not going to get anything that's any closer, therefore shouldn't we sort of accept this being the best thing that we have? And I think iRacing is widely regarded as being the best simulation out there. I mean, Max Verstappen, for example, he says he won't race on anything except iRacing because everything else isn't as close. Like, you can get these sort of little glitches and tips and tricks to work out that would never work in a real life race car. iRacing is hailed because it can do that, but obviously it's not perfect. Like, there are going to still be these little incidents, as you rightly say, that do sort of mar it. So yeah, I think it's never going to be perfect, but I think when you've got the absolute closest thing you have to real life racing right now, I think you've got to run with that as best you can, and yeah, accept that these glitches, they are going to happen sometimes, but I think they're rarer in iRacing than they would be across other simulations or games.
It's funny that you mentioned Max in iRacing, because one of the things that he has been kind of associated with is that little pit lane. People don't want to call it a hack, but you can find time in the pit lane, right, on iRacing by not using your pit limiter and essentially riding at 1 or 2 kilometers an hour faster than your rivals, and doing a few little tips and tricks. And Max obviously has learnt this trick. It's been banned from the sports cars racing, famously, because that's where he used it, and I think somebody else used it. It might have been McLaughlin, actually, used it to gain an advantage. But it's all these things, right? Is that just part of gaming, right? Or can I call it gaming? That's just part of esports, right? You learn the ins and outs and the eccentricities, and you learn how to handle those. Obviously, again, coming back to Pagenaud's Twitch, his spotter was talking about how that move that Pagenaud lost out on, it wouldn't have happened in real life racing. Like, you don't go 3 wide on an oval, right? That's just not what happens. You have to respect that, you know, the car's going to be there and it's going to turn, and 3 cars into that corner doesn't work. But, you know, I think actually somebody's going to mention it, so I don't want to kind of steal their thunder. But isn't that the point of iRacing, in that you can get away with it in iRacing? So if you're not going to try it, then you're losing out, not Lando.
Yeah, exactly. And it is kind of that, again, that inner competitive edge of how far are you willing to go? What are you willing to do to try and get that extra couple of kilometers an hour in the pit lane, as Max Verstappen was doing? It's that kind of edge that you want to have over your rivals. And yeah, okay, you would never try that move on a real live racetrack, but in the virtual world, you think, well, I can probably get away with it, probably give it a little go. And because ultimately there isn't that risk there, and the worst you're going to do is go off and hit reset, but you're still okay, you're still in your seat, you're unhurt. So yeah, that is the sort of tricky element of it, is how far do you accept the simulation will go, and how far do you enforce your sort of real life ruling and your real life sort of thinking, particularly when you are behind the wheel. Because ultimately, yep, you want to keep it authentic, you want to be fair, but also you know that if you absolutely stick to that, you may lose out to your rivals. And racing drivers, they hate losing.
They do indeed. And we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, and you just touched on it there, Luke, but there have been real world implications from esports that have affected drivers. So we mentioned the Kyle Larson incident. You know, he's lost his NASCAR seat because of an esports incident. We had Bubba Wallace, who lost sponsors because he got angry and rage quit. Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? And now we've got obviously these 2 IndyCar incidents that we seem to be talking about forever. But there does seem to be this want or this need for, even though it's virtual, there needs to be real world implications for the drivers to therefore make any bad behaviour have a consequence, essentially. But so not everybody agrees. Poke Tim Gaming has an opposing opinion.
My opinion on this week's topic is that esports shouldn't be taken as seriously as regular racing, because esports is mostly fun and games, especially during this time of lockdown and being separated and not being able to do the real job. It's mostly just for fun and games, and the sponsor shouldn't be looking at this as like a real thing, and it's like serious for the drivers to be performing as well as they can, because this is just for fun.
So I think this is an argument that a lot of people have kind of been toing and froing about, isn't it? Like, it's just a game. So why are we taking it so seriously? But I think it kind of leads us into the next point that we've put together, in that there is this subculture of gaming, right? And I can use gaming because that is what it is. But the online gaming, you mentioned GT Sport. You know, you're not doing that. Well, maybe you are doing that to become an esports pro, but you're doing that for fun and to have a bit of, something to do, and I don't think, if someone punts you off, actually that's an interesting point, because correct me if I'm wrong, does GT Sport has a sportsmanship?
It does, yeah,
counter,
it does,
right?
And what's even more than that is, before you're allowed to go online and play any online races, you have to sit through a 2.5 minute video put together by the FIA, all about sportsman driving and how you do it. And it is then, when you're, I think, put into matches and races with other people, it'll do it by both your driver ability and your sportsmanship. So for example, I was involved in a few races recently where I kept qualifying sort of middle of the pack. I get caught up in an incident at turn 1 that was obviously never my fault, and then my sportsmanship rating started coming down, and then I'd be involved in more of these scrappy races, and you have to build that back up. And that is the message, though, that the game does want to put out there to people, that ultimately you've got to treat this as you would a real life race. Be fair. Don't go into contact with other drivers, because racing is a non-contact sport ultimately. So, and that's a game telling you that.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's you're meant to have a bit. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I think of it. You know how you do bumper cars, and they always say like, don't bump each other, and you're like, you're called bumper cars.
Yeah.
So kind of like, I feel like you're cheating me out of this, and everybody ignores it, right?
Yeah.
It's a strange example, I will admit, but it's just something that jumped into mind where I'm like, you're told to do one thing, but then I don't know, like the culture of it and the kind of the underlying message to it is you're gonna whack each other. So it's and you know, we applaud, right? We applaud when the drivers have a bit of fun. You know, we've been loving the fact that the F1 drivers have been doing blooming, like, what is it, Euro lorry simulator or you know, lawnmower simulator, and you know, there've been, I've seen the brilliant clip of someone's put together every time Alex Albon gets mad at George.
Oh yeah, George,
right? They love it, and we applaud it, right? We share it on our Twitter pages. You know, we make memes out of it, and we're like, oh, isn't this brilliant? And we do the same thing with like online gaming culture. You know, the amount of memes that you see, like every online lobby start and it's just chaos, or you know, the recent supercars race at, was it Melbourne, the opening lap was actual carnage, you know, like it was just like, and I think even the commentator said something about someone being punted into oblivion, and it's you know, so where do we draw the line between online gaming culture and serious proper racing? You know, like where is that line? And I'm gonna jump a few clips. Sorry, Martin, who's working all the magic behind the scenes. But if we can jump to Arava's point, I think he puts it together quite nicely and succinctly.
If it's truly an esports event, then 100% yes, always should be, i.e. what every single iRacing race is. iRacing is made for esports, so much so that the avid players of it don't even like it being called a video game. They prefer sim, because literally every single race you're given deduction points for being off track, tapping other cars, tapping the walls. It is an esports game. It's made for nothing but esports. If it's just a gaming event on a more casual game, or a game that's not like iRacing per se, and it just happens to have big names, or it's for charity, then you can just call it any bit of fun. You know, whatever happens in it, it's a bit of fun. There might be some high octane, high level racing in those kind of events as well, but overall it's just for fun. Nothing's really on the line, and also you all know what you're signing up for. It's a fun charity race, it's a fun event. All esports is gaming, but all gaming is not esports. You know, esports itself does not equal gaming every single time. But in the case of that IndyCar race, it was an esports event, in my opinion, because it was made by the IndyCar organizers. You had sponsors officially making liveries for the game, for their drivers. You wouldn't really do that if it was just a fun charity event. You would just use kind of the in-game liveries or just some funny ones, but they made every single car look like the ones from real life, and it was all kind of sanctioned essentially by IndyCar themselves. And obviously the amount of practice being put in was certainly to an esports level. The amount of hours Lando Norris, for example, put in, and like I said, it was on iRacing. So in my opinion, every race on there is an esports race, basically.
So, kind of echoing a lot of what we've spoken about throughout this podcast, but I think Arava kind of hits the nail on the head for me. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I agree. I think saying that all esports is gaming, but not all gaming is esports, I think that's a perfect way to put it. And I think we have seen a big divide throughout this whole explosion of esports in motorsport over the past 2 months or so, that we do have those fun, more casual events. Some of the events, for example, that F1 are running, and they have, the F1 drivers involved, but all of them, obviously they want to win, but they are enjoying themselves. And then they rope in some names from all over the place. I mean, Liam Payne from One Direction and Ian Poulter, the golfer, they're getting involved as well, because they've got a sim and they want to do some online racing. But none of them are going into that sort of thinking, okay, I've got to be the best and I'm going to take this super, super seriously, because largely of the platform that it is. And like, there's no, I think I'm correct in saying there's no damage in those events, for example, so that all the drivers can race as they want. You see drivers sort of straight lining corners and like doing all kinds of stuff just to try and have a bit of fun with that. But then like F1, for example, with their virtual GP series, they'll do that. And then afterwards they have their pro race, which is for all of the esports stars who like have officially been part of the F1 esports series, who are signed up with teams. And that's taken way, way, way more seriously. So I think it's that kind of is a good place where it can be the same game, but the lines can be sort of blurred a little bit as to what counts as esports and what doesn't. Totally agree with Arava that on the IndyCar iRacing series, because of the platform, because of how seriously the series had set up that championship, I think 100% that can officially be called like proper esports. And I think, there's room for both. Like ultimately, a lot of people, as you rightly say, we've enjoyed watching the boys sort of mecking around on truck simulator and lawnmowers and all of that and having some fun with it, but they're never trying to say that's esports and that's serious. The IndyCar one though, that was pretty serious. So I think Arava really hits the nail on the head there, as you say.
Okay, so what needs to happen then, Luke? Do we need to make it clear? Because at the moment people seem confused, drivers seem confused, and we're getting serious reprimands and people really losing out and having their careers affected because of this esports stuff or gaming stuff, whichever we're going to decide it is. So what do we do? Like, what's the solution here? Is there one? I don't know. I'm asking you, Luke, because you clearly have all the answers.
Oh, it's all on me. Jeez. I think there's just got to be clear communication from the people running these series and these championships as to what they want to achieve. And I think that it's been made very clear by some of the more social events, for example, what like Charles Leclerc set up with the Race for the World charity events. It was clear that was all about having some fun, and that if people want to tune in and watch drivers mucking about, they can go on Twitch and they'll be streaming most days now. Like, that's very easy to watch. But then I think when it comes to events like IndyCar and I think F1, depending on how they want to run it, as particularly as they are with their pro series, I think they need to make clear from day one, look, this is a proper esports event, and therefore you've got the real world sponsors involved. We want you to act as you would in a real life race situation, because right now that's the best we're going to get. That's the closest we're going to get, because ultimately it's going to devalue it otherwise, I think. And I think the IndyCar, all of the good work that was done by IndyCar over the past 5 races was all undone in the 6th race because of what happened. And all of the ideas about how professional and how slick that series was, it's all gone now because everyone was like, oh, just a game, isn't it? So I think there really needs to be proper communication from the people running this series to its drivers, to its teams, to say, look, this is what we want to achieve, and if we want to be a proper esports championship, these are the rules you need to abide by.
There we go. I think we're going to take one more fan take, which is from Tomo F1. Let's see what he's got to say.
The whole "it's just a game" thing just doesn't fly. Like, that's such a cop-out thing to say. You could say that literally about any sport. Let's take tennis, for example. You've got professional competitors. You've got sponsors spending real money. You've got people watching, enjoying from home, right? How's it any different? It's no different. In terms of a spectacle, an entertainment, sporting spectacle, it is no different, and the rules should be considered as serious as anything else. Otherwise, esports is never going to be taken seriously unless they actually, put their foot down on stuff like this and don't let people get away with the, oh, it's just a game cop-out. Yes, it's not real-life motorsport with real-life danger. If anything, real-life motorsport, it should be taken even more seriously. But as far as I'm concerned, the rules in this should be adhered to and followed by as seriously as any other normal sport.
It's just a game argument is a cop-out, according to Tomo.
Completely.
I'm gonna throw a curveball, though.
Okay.
Do you think people will still watch if they know there's not going to be carnage? Because for me, I feel like the carnage is one of the selling points, and the ridiculousness is one of the selling points, because you don't get that, or you'd hope not, because if you got that kind of carnage in real life racing, people are going to get hurt. So, if we take that away, if we make it really serious, are people going to enjoy it still?
I think it depends on what you want to get out of it, and also what you want to achieve with it. So, for example, like, again, if you want to see that carnage, it's very, very easy to get that watching the Twitch streams the lads will do together, and they'll put out tweets saying, oh, we're having a chill session, come and watch. And it's clear that they're just gonna play around with it and just have fun. I mean, for example, Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. Like, I think that, like, going on YouTube, and if you watch, say, I don't know, like a game like Call of Duty, I think you'd much rather see a game of like funny clips of people doing like really stupid moves and like just having fun with it, rather than like super serious sort of the professionals who are the absolute best in the world. And that's just from my perspective. But then you'll have these sort of diehard fans who might be like, no, I want to see like the amazing skills and to see what these guys can really do. So I think, yeah, that will depend on the type of fan that you're trying to attract. Yeah, and I think that's what it's going to come down to, really. I think the important thing, though, is that both of those sort of forms, both the carnage side of it and the super professional side, I think they've both got to be accessible. And I think there are fans to cater on both sides of that. So I think that it's important that both those avenues are left open. So that's why I think having a super serious, sort of very professional esports league, I think that's definitely important. I think it is. But then I think you've got to say to the drivers involved, look, this is what we want to do. Are you on board? Are you not? Because if you're not, if you just want to play around and it's only a game, if that's your point of view, then there's another championship, another league that you can go and do, and you'll be more than welcome to sort of race with like-minded people there.
Ooh, Luke getting harsh and telling the home truths there. I think we can probably get to summing it up. I think that sums it up pretty well in that I totally agree that both deserve a place in our worlds and in the entertainment arena, for sure. But you're right, it needs to just be communicated that one is having fun, and maybe that is to do with the way that we name things, or I think that helps a lot with people, right? Because obviously you've got the virtual GP series, right? At no point it's the F1 Esports virtual GP series. So is that the conflictor there? Because as I think, and I agree with you, that series to me is a bit of fun. They've got some right characters racing, as you've pointed out, and the likes of like YouTubers Will E and Arava, who we heard from before, takes part in it a lot, or at least commentates on it. And in that event, we've had Ian Poulter, the golfer, punting Lando off into nowhere, and Lando was just laughing and found the whole thing very funny. And even though it was like, I'm not going to say it's a similar incident, because Ian didn't intentionally punt him off, it just happened. It's kind of like, okay, so how do we is there a way that we can differ those two things? But I guess you're right, it does come down to ultimately the event. So the proper esports ones, I would argue, they need higher levels of stewarding, along with the iRacing technical stewards that are kind of embedded within the simulation. Like, have those there, but have people there that are going to be manning it. And if someone is seen to be unsportsmanlike, then that deserves a reprimand of the punishment should always fit the crime. And again, we could probably go on a whole other podcast. I swear I say this every single podcast. There's another subject.
We're never going to run out of topics. It's great.
No, I know. Yeah, that's the whole point of this. Like, opinions are going to be forever, so they're going to keep coming. But it's we already argue about whether the penalties and punishments in F1 are fair and given out fairly. So it's probably just going to be a debate that runs around and round, and no one can really agree. But I think at Baxi Himanshu on Twitter probably sums it up really well. And they said, it's just a game. It's true, right? But each game has rules, and we're all meant to play by them. It's like, if somebody doesn't play Monopoly fairly, boards are going to get flipped in my household. Like, if someone's trying to cheat, sneaking some money out of the banker's pot or whatever, I'm not going to be happy. No. I'll tell you a story. I mean, this tells a lot about me. I'm super competitive. I don't like losing. I find it very hard. But, we've got into a bit of a rhythm of playing like Trivial Pursuit, right? Mm-hmm. Bit of a quiz. And I realised that, because we were playing it as a group, but obviously virtually across we all had different versions of the game. And the questions that my team was getting asked were from like 1970 or something like that. And I was like, I'm never going to get any of those answers right. All the questions from my set were from 5 years ago. So everybody knew them. And I was like, right, I am not playing it's not fair. There is no way I'm going to win because your questions are different from mine, and that's not fair. You know, we're playing a different game. So I think, whilst that's a very weird example of that, I think that if we're not all agreeing on what the rules of play are, then we're never going to get a fair outcome or a fair play. So
yeah, I think that is fair, and I mean from my point of view as well, I going back to Gran Turismo, I love it. I've got sort of a couple of groups of friends that I've been playing it, and playing it with. I've got one group where we will just message and say, "Oh, I'm online. Is anyone else around?" And we might get together and we just do like 3 or 4 lap races. There's normally a crash fest. We put all the settings, so you got like crazy slipstream and stuff like that, and it is literally just about having some fun. And like whoever makes it to the end in one piece, great, you've done it. And then there's another group of friends who they take it super, super seriously. Like it's all about fair racing and doing things correctly. And I sort of, when I'm racing on those two sides, like I have very different, I think, even mentality going into it. And because you just kind of think, okay, well, these are the set of rules I'm going to in one form, and then in the other form, it's a very different way. And I think that's probably just what esports needs to do. And as you rightly say, you need to know, okay, what rules am I playing to? Is it Trivial Pursuit from 2015 or is it Trivial Pursuit from 1970? And that way you know. Otherwise, yeah, it's just got to be clear, I think.
Right. And on that bombshell, I think we're about ready to wrap up. But obviously you've heard everyone listening or watching, you've heard from a lot of the fans on what they think. We'll be doing this every week. We want your opinions on this show. This show is driven by your opinions. So make sure you're looking out on our social channels at Autosport. We'll be asking you for feedback on next week's topic, whatever we choose that to be. Another spicy opinion, another spicy take. Make sure you rate us on your audio platform if you're enjoying this series. And as ever, give us your feedback. Leave it in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. Tweet myself and Luke if you're listening on audio platforms. But as with all of these podcasts, I never feel like we come to like a proper conclusion as to whether they should. I think you nailed it on the head, right, when you said that there just needs to be a differentiation. And if we can all agree to the rules, then we agree to the rules. So that's awesome. But yes, thanks ever so much for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week, next Wednesday, as ever, when this podcast comes out. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.